crippled from a beating at 8 years old and cast out. A cowboy lifted her standing and gave her worth. I was nailing a loose board on the livery gate when I first saw her. Not walking, more of a drag and a lurch, right leg going sideways at the hip, like the joint had been set wrong and never corrected. She was carrying a flour sack in both arms, head down, moving along the far edge of the street the way water moves around a rock, staying clear of foot traffic. Muddy hem, hair down her back in one braid, thick as a rope, black as good coffee. She was maybe 22, 23. Couldn't tell you more than that from that distance. What I remember is that nobody got out of her way. 3 men standing outside the Assier's office, talking about nothing. She had to veer off into the mud to go around them. None of them moved. None of them looked. She didn't look at them either. She was used to not existing. I kept hammering. That was October. I'd been in Harlan Creek about 6 weeks, working for a man named Cutter who owned the livery and half the warehousing on the south end of town. Good work, steady pay, not complicated. I was 51 years old, had been punching cattle, fixing fences, and hauling freight for other men my whole life. No wife, no land to speak of. I owned a horse, a saddle, a good rifle, and a bedroll that had got me through 2 bad winters in Montana. That was my arithmetic. The town was ordinary frontier misery, a main street that turned to soup when it rained, a church nobody much attended, a saloon everybody did, a few dozen homesteads in the valley around it, and a general store run by a family named Prout. Elias Prout and his wife Dora. The flour sack she'd been carrying came from Prout's. I found that out later. She did piecework for Dora Prout, mending, washing, whatever Dora didn't want to bend her own back to. She'd come in the back door, do her work, take her wages in goods rather than coin, and leave the same way she'd come. Dora was not cruel. She just didn't see any particular reason to treat the girl like she mattered, because nobody else did either, and it's easier to follow a current than swim against it. Her name was Lena Marsh. I didn't know that for 2 weeks. She didn't go to the saloon, didn't attend church. There was a rooming house on the north end run by a widow named Fayette, the kind of rooming house that barely held together, where the walls sweated in summer and the stove cracked every winter. Lena had a room on the back end of it for 2 bits a week. She'd lived there 3 years, before that somewhere else, before that somewhere else again. I got all this in pieces over time, from a man named Orrin who drove Cutter's freight wagon and had a habit of talking while he worked. "The girl with the bad leg," I said one afternoon while we were loading barrels. "Lena Marsh," Orrin said. He didn't offer more right away. "She live here long. Long enough." He set a barrel down, got a new grip on it. Orrin was the kind of man who chewed on things before he handed them over. "Got hurt when she was small," he finally said. 8, 9 years old, her daddy beat her with a wagon tongue. Hip went wrong, couldn't work a proper farm or ranch after that. Mother was already gone. Daddy left after. She's been making do since she was maybe 12. He picked up the next barrel, and we didn't talk about it again. I thought about it, though. I thought about it more than I should have, probably. A wagon tongue. The specific, deliberate weight of that, not a belt, not a hand, not a moment of rage that at least could be explained by drink or desperation. A wagon tongue taken up and used on an 8-year-old child. I'd seen meanness in men. I'd ridden alongside it and worked for it and once or twice been on the wrong end of it myself. But there's a kind of meanness that isn't anger, just contempt, and that kind is a different order of ugly. The man had looked at his own child and decided she wasn't worth anything, had decided to make it permanent. I kept loading barrels, I kept nailing boards, I kept doing my job for Cutter because that's what I was there to do. But I watched the street differently after that. I noticed she didn't eat midday. I noticed the coat she wore in late October was too thin for what was coming. I noticed that Fayette's rooming house had a drain pipe loose on the south wall that poured water directly onto the path to the back rooms when it rained, which meant that every time it rained, the path to her door turned to a skating rink of mud, and she had to drag that compromised leg through it or not get home. I noticed all of that, and I didn't do a single thing about it for 2 more weeks, because she wasn't my business, and I had enough sense to know that a woman living alone on the margins doesn't need a strange man deciding he knows what she needs. What changed, it was a Thursday evening, cold enough that my breath was going white. I was coming back from Cutter's place on the south end, passing the alley behind the dry goods store. There was a group of boys, 4 of them, 12 to 15 years old, the age where boys are at their most dangerous because they're strong enough to cause damage and too young to know what damage looks like when it's done. They'd found Lena on her way back from Prout's. I don't know if they'd planned it or just fallen into it the way bored boys fall into cruelty, but they had her backed against the alley wall and they were mimicking her walk, dragging one leg, swinging the hip out, laughing. She was standing very still, holding her flour sack, looking at a fixed point on the wall above their heads. Not crying, her jaw set like iron. One of them knocked the sack out of her hands. I don't remember deciding to walk into that alley. I was just there. I didn't raise my voice. I'm not a man who raises his voice. It's never seemed necessary when the other option is standing in such a way that raising your voice would be redundant. I looked at them, and they looked at me, and the one closest to her took about 2 steps back on instinct, which told me everything I needed to know about what kind of grown men they were going to be if nobody corrected them now. I told them to pick up what they'd knocked down and hand it to the lady. Didn't say please. They did it, the tallest one anyway, with a sullen arm's-length shove of the sack, and then they left. She watched them go, then she looked at me. Her eyes were a particular shade of dark brown that I can only call honest, not warm, not cold, just clear and direct. The eyes of someone who has gotten very good at reading the room fast because her circumstances have required it. She looked at me the way you'd look at any unknown variable. Assessing. "Thank you," she said, quiet voice, no gravel in it. "Going toward Fayette's," I said. She said she was. "I'm headed that direction," I said, which was not entirely a lie. We walked. I didn't try to hold her arm or assist her. She had a particular rhythm to the way she moved, drag and step, swing and catch, and she'd been doing it long enough that it was its own kind of efficient. She didn't need help walking. What she needed was someone alongside her who made the street feel less open. I told her my name. She told me hers. That was the whole conversation. At the rooming house, she went to the back, and I went back the way I'd come, into the cold and the thin light of evening. I fixed the drain pipe that weekend. Fayette didn't ask me to. I told her it was going to rot the wall if she left it, and she said, "Suit yourself," and I did. I don't know why that felt important to do. I'm not sure I could have told you then. But there's a certain kind of problem that once you've seen it, you can't stop seeing it, and a loose drain pipe pouring water onto the path to a woman's door is either something you fix or something you look away from, and I had never been much good at looking away. Cutter noticed. He was an observant man, made his money in freight, which means he spent 30 years watching people to see if they were going to cost him something. About a week after the drain pipe, he said to me without preamble, while we were going over the inventory ledger, "You interested in the Marsh girl?" I told him I'd helped her out of a situation with some boys. "That's not what I asked." I thought about it. "I don't know yet," I said, which was honest. He grunted, turned a ledger page. "Town's got a certain way of seeing her," he said. "Man gets mixed up in that, the town sees him the same way." "I've been seen worse ways," I said. He looked at me over the ledger. Then he nodded once and went back to his numbers. Cutter was not a sentimental man, but he was a fair one, and he had a particular respect for people who said what they meant without dressing it up. I started leaving things. I'm not sure what you'd call it. I'd stop by Prute's on a day I knew she'd be there and happened to have an extra pair of good wool gloves, the kind with the double-stitched lining, and I'd say to Dora Prute, "Oh, these were left in my saddlebag, they belong to whoever can use them," and I'd set them on the back counter where Lena worked and walk out. A coat a few weeks later, a good one, lined with sheepskin, that I'd picked up off a freighter who needed coin more than warmth. I told Fayette it was lost property from the livery, somebody's, and Fayette had enough years on her that she either believed me or was kind enough to pretend she did, and she put it on the hook by Lena's door. I'm not romanticizing this. It wasn't romantic. It was more like I had found a situation that was wrong, where someone capable of being fine was not fine because of things done to her before she had any say in the matter, and I was in a position to put something right without making a spectacle of it, so I did. That was all. That was the whole of it at the start. She figured it out. Of course she did. She'd been reading rooms her whole life. One afternoon in late November, she was at Prute's when I came in for tobacco, and she looked at me with those level brown eyes, and she said, "It was you." Not a question. I said some of it. She looked at me for a long moment, not angry, not grateful either exactly, or not the way most people are grateful, which is soft and a little uncomfortable. She looked at me the way she'd looked at those boys from the alley wall, direct, assessing, making sure she understood what she was dealing with. Why, she said. I thought about the drain pipe and the coat and the gloves and the boys in the alley and the man who'd picked up a wagon tongue. Because it needed doing, I said. Another long look, then she nodded once very slightly and went back to her work. I bought my tobacco and left. That was how it started. That was the whole ceremony of it. November into December. She started acknowledging me when I passed on the street, not a wave, just a small upward tilt of the chin, the way two people who have an understanding do when they see each other in public. I started timing my errands for when I knew she'd be about, not to hover, just to be a presence. The boys didn't bother her again. I don't know if that was me or just the particular attention span of boys that age, but it didn't happen again. We talked eventually. Not a single long conversation, but many short ones at Pruitt's, at the end of the livery lane, once at the church steps on a Tuesday morning when neither of us was there for church, just both of us happened to be passing. She was smarter than most people she'd ever been given credit for, which surprised me not at all. She'd taught herself to read from a Bible and a seed catalog and whatever else had come to hand, which is a harder thing than people realize. She had opinions about weather and livestock and the general unfitness of Harlan Creek's one deputy for any work requiring thought. She said what she thought without ornamentation. I found that restful. December brought a hard freeze, then a thaw, then a harder freeze. The kind of cold that comes in December on the plains, the kind that makes the boards in the walls contract and crack and the horses stamp all night, and your water bucket has an inch of ice on it by morning. I was sleeping in the tack room at the livery most nights, which was warmer than I had any right to expect given the accommodations, and I was doing all right. Lena was not doing all right. Fayette's rooming house was old. The windows sealed badly. The stove in the front room threw heat for maybe the front quarter of the building and nothing else, and Lena's room was at the back end. I found out about this not from her but from Orrin, who'd been doing some work at Fayette's and reported that the back rooms were, and this was his precise word, unsurvivable in a bad December. He said it the way men say things they expect you to already know, just a passing notation, nothing to get worked up about. I went to see Fayette. The livery had a loft room, nothing much, a hay-smelling plank room above the stalls with a window that actually sealed, and a cast iron stove that worked, and a cot that was better than what most people in Harlan Creek were sleeping on. Cutter used it for overflow hands in the summer. It sat empty in winter. I told Fayette I needed to tell her about the loft room at the livery. Fayette looked at me. I told her the cold back rooms were a danger. Fayette looked at me some more. You talked to the girl, she said. Not yet, I said. Fayette thought about it. She's got pride, she said. Not a criticism, just a fact she wanted to make sure I'd accounted for. Yes, I said. You going about this the right way? I said I was going to try. I went to Pruitt's. Lena was at the back counter, working through a stack of Dora's mending. I stood in the doorway and I told her about the loft room. I told her it was empty, it was warm, it cost nothing because it cost me nothing to offer it. I told her I worked in the livery by day and slept in the tack room, and she'd have the loft to herself with the door bolted, and I was not making any kind of claim by offering it. She could take it for the winter and leave in the spring, and I'd help her move her things and ask nothing else. She kept her needle moving while I said all of this. When I stopped talking, she said, "Do you want me to say yes because I need it or because I want it?" I said I wanted her to say yes because she needed it, if she needed it, and because she could trust me to mean what I'd said if she could trust that. She set the mending down. She looked at the wall above my head, the same fixed point, the same iron jaw for a moment. Then she looked at me. All right, she said. I helped her move her things on a Saturday. It wasn't much, the coat, the gloves, a box with her Bible and seed catalog and 2 other books, a few items of clothing, a tin cup she'd had since she was a girl that she handled like it was made of something valuable. She didn't tell me what it was from. I didn't ask. We got it all in one trip with Orrin's wagon. She took the loft. I took the tack room. The door at the top of the loft stairs had a bolt she could throw, which I showed her the first day. She threw it every night, which was right and proper, and I slept better for it. I want to be clear about what this was, because I've had men look at me sidelong when I tell this part and make a certain kind of assumption that insults both of us. Nothing happened that winter except that a woman who had been cold got warm. She slept. She ate better. I cooked on the tack room stove most evenings, and I cooked for 2, not as an imposition, but because cooking for one is barely worth the trouble, and I had 2 plates. She'd come down and eat, and we'd talk, and she'd go back up and bolt her door, and that was the whole of it. I was not her protector in the ownership sense of the word. I was just a man who had removed a few obstacles and happened to be in the vicinity, and she was a woman who was more than capable of managing her own life when the obstacles were removed. But I watched her change. It's a subtle thing how a person who has been ground down carries it. A slight hunch to the shoulder, a habit of looking for exits, an efficiency in movement that comes from a lifetime of staying out of the way. Over the winter, those things loosened in her, not all at once, not dramatically, just the hunch came up degree by degree. The darting look toward exits slowed. She stopped moving around me like I was a rock in the stream and started just moving, taking up space. Setting her coffee cup on the table with a little more authority. Saying things with a little more weight behind them, like she expected her words to land. She was funny. That surprised me, though I'm not sure why it should have. The specific dry humor of a person who has seen too much to be impressed by the official version of things. She made me laugh more that winter than I'd laughed in years, and I'm not a man who laughs easily, which made it all the more notable. January was the hard month. A storm came in from the northwest that lasted 4 days and dropped enough snow to make the valley look like something you'd paint rather than live in. We were snowed in, the whole town more or less. I fed the horses, kept the stove going, dug a path to the water trough twice a day, and didn't go anywhere else. Lena sewed. She'd brought in mending from Dora Prout before the storm, and she sat in the loft with a lamp on a nail and worked through all of it, and then asked if I had anything that needed mending, which I did: a coat sleeve, a pair of trousers that had taken a bad tear on a fence post. She fixed both. I thanked her. She said she had the time and the needles, so why not? On the third evening of the storm, with the wind going sideways outside, and the horses settled, and the stove throwing enough heat that I'd taken my coat off for the first time all week, she came down from the loft and sat across from me at the table and told me about her father. She didn't ask if I wanted to hear it. She just started talking in her plain, flat voice, and I listened. 8 years old. They'd been on a claim in Kansas that was failing. He'd come back from town, and something had gone wrong. She never knew what, whether it was the claim or the debt or just the drink, and she'd been in the way at the wrong moment, and he'd been holding the wagon tongue, and that was that. She'd been in a fever for 2 weeks after. A neighbor woman had set the hip as best she could, but it had healed off-Drew, and it had been off-Drew ever since. I used to think it was something I'd done, she said. It wasn't, I said. I know that now. She looked at the table. Took a long time to know it. The fire cracked. The wind pushed hard against the south wall, leaned on it, and moved on. You were 8 years old, I said. The man was a coward. She looked up at me. Yes, she said, just that. We sat with that for a while, outside the storm, inside the lamp and the fire and the table between us. I've been watching this town write you off for 2 months, I said. I want you to know I find that extraordinary. She was quiet. There is not one person on this street, I said, with your particular combination of sense and spine. Not one. She looked at me for a long time, the brown eyes level and clear, and something else now, a question in them she wasn't quite asking yet. You don't say things you don't mean, she said. No, I said. I know, she said. Another silence. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that happens when something has been said that covers a lot of ground and both people know it. All right, she said finally, and went back up to the loft. When the storm broke, she came out with me to dig the path to the trough. She couldn't swing a heavy shovel with the hip, but she managed a smaller one just fine, and we worked side by side in the white and the cold until the path was clear. Cutter came by to check on the horses and stood in the livery door and looked at us and didn't say a word. Went back to his business. February. Something had settled between us by February. Hard to name it. Not a courtship in the ordinary sense, no dances, no chaperoned visits, no formal calling. Just a man and a woman who had been eating together, and talking together, and working alongside each other through a hard winter, and both of them knowing that the situation had become more than its original practical terms. She started putting the bolt up later. I noticed that, didn't say anything, just noticed. I went to see Elias Prout one morning in February. He was a man who liked to know who was who in his town, which is a reasonable thing in a general store, knowing who's solvent, who's not, who can be trusted to make good. I'd done a few jobs for him over the months, odd work beyond Cutter's. We had a workable relationship. I sat down with him, and I told him what I intended, which was that Lena Marsh had been doing piecework for wages that were insufficient for what she produced, and that I thought her terms ought to be improved. He looked at me with the careful eye of a man recalculating. "She's done good work," he said carefully. "She's done exceptional work," I said. "I've seen it, you know it." "Lots of hands do good work," he said. "Lots of hands don't teach themselves to read from a seed catalog at 10 years old," I said. "Lots of hands don't have her arithmetic either. You could use her in the store itself. She'd be worth more to you up front than she is in the back." He thought about this. "The town's got a certain," he started. "I know what the town's got," I said. He looked at me. "Reweighed something. You're serious about this." "I don't travel to a man's store in February to not be serious," I said. He tapped his finger on the counter for a moment. Then, "I'll talk to Dora." I don't know exactly what Dora said to Elias or Elias said to Dora, but within a week Lena was working the counter 3 days out of 5 at an actual wage. Better clothes came with better wages, not extravagant. She wasn't built for extravagance, just clothes that fit properly, and a pair of boots with a good sole that didn't slip in the mud. I watched her behind that counter, and something settled in my chest that I hadn't known was unsettled. She was good at the work. She was patient with people in the ponderous, unhurried way that comes from having spent years being patient by necessity, but there was nothing servile in it. She answered questions directly. She didn't flatter or flail. When a man came in with a complaint about a mislabeled barrel, she heard him out and told him flatly he was right and they'd credit his account, and the man looked surprised, not at being right, but at being heard and left satisfied. Elias watched all of this and said nothing, and started trusting her with the ledger. There was one afternoon in March mud season, everything thawing and refreezing and the street an absolute catastrophe, when I was passing Prout's and heard raised voices from inside. I went in. A man I didn't know well, a homesteader from up the valley named Decker, was at the counter, loud and red-faced, unhappy about something to do with a seed order. His tone was the kind of tone that starts as legitimate complaint and crosses a line when the person behind the counter is a woman, and the man decides that means he can say anything. He was saying anything. Lena was standing very still, the iron jaw. I came to stand at the counter, not next to Decker, between him and the exit, which is a different message. He looked at me, I looked at him, I didn't say a word. Decker's face went through several phases. Then he looked back at Lena and said more quietly, "I'll take the credit on the spring order." "That's the right outcome," Lena said and wrote it in the ledger. After he left, I stayed. She wrote in the ledger for a moment. Then she set the pen down and looked at me, and I saw it in her face, not relief exactly, but something close to it, something more complicated, something that had to do with a woman who had spent years having no one standing at that particular angle. "You should go before Elias comes back and thinks you're driving away business," she said. "Decker would have driven himself away," I said. "I was just the scenery." She almost smiled, almost. "Go," she said. I went. Spring, the ice came off the valley and the creek ran full and brown, and the world looked like it had decided to make another try at itself. Lena was still in the loft. We hadn't talked about what happened when spring came. I'd said she could leave in spring, and she'd said all right, and then spring came, and she was still there, and neither of us had said anything about it. I found a situation that needed addressing. There was a piece of land at the edge of town, an empty lot that had belonged to a man named Ferris who'd gone east and left the deed in an ambiguous state. Nobody had built on it. I looked into the deed situation, which took several weeks of letters and a trip to the county seat, and I made Ferris's heir, who was a nephew in Kansas City who'd never been to the territory and never intended to be, a fair offer for it. A small amount. The nephew took it without argument. I had a piece of land, clear title, just about large enough for a house with a garden behind it, on the quieter end of the main street. I didn't tell Lena until the deed was done. We were at the table one evening in May. The door was open because May was finally warm enough for that, and the sounds of the livery, horses settling, a rope swinging against a post, were coming in with the light air. I set the deed on the table between us. She looked at it, then at me. "What's this?" she said, not a question exactly. "A piece of ground," I said. "I thought you might want to know it exists." She picked it up. "Read it carefully. The address, the terms, the recording number, all of it. The way a person who taught themselves to read from a seed catalog reads things, with full attention and nothing taken on faith. "It's in your name," she said. "For now," I said. She set the deed down, looked at me. "I'm not a man who makes speeches. I have never in my life made a speech to a woman or to anyone else, and this moment was not going to be the first time." I told her that I had been on my own for 30 years by my own choice, and not by my own choice, and that somewhere in the particular winter we'd just come through I had stopped being able to tell the difference between the two, and that I didn't have much to offer except that I meant what I said, and I intended what I said, and I was 51 years old, which meant I was done wasting time. She had the deed in her hands. "I've never had anything in my name," she said. "I know," I said. She was quiet for a long time. The rope swung against the post outside. The horses settled. "You know people will talk," she said. "People in this town have been talking their whole lives," I said. "Seems to have limited effect on how things turn out." She looked at the deed again. Then she folded it once and set it flat on the table and put her hand on top of it, flat, like she was pressing it into the table to make sure it was real. "If I say yes," she said, "I want it known that I said yes because I chose to, not because you provided for me, not because you were the only one who asked." "I know the difference," I said. "So do you." She looked at me for a long time. The brown eyes, clear and level, and there it was, what had been in them since January, since the lamp on the nail and the storm outside, and a man saying without hesitation that she had more sense and spine than anyone on the street, and meaning every syllable of it. She reached across the table and put her hand on mine. Her hand was warm. She'd spent the whole winter learning what warm was. "Yes," she said, "I choose it." We built the house that summer. I did most of the heavy work. Orrin helped on weekends for the goodwill of it, and Cutter lent me 2 good hammers and a draw knife and never asked for them back. Lena worked alongside in the ways she could and got creative in the ways she couldn't, and there's not a single beam in that house that she didn't have a hand in somehow, which is the right way for a house to be. Elias Prout came by one afternoon with a load of good lumber, 2 board feet over what I'd paid for, and said nothing about the extra. The town's way of seeing her changed. Not all at once, not dramatically, but a man who puts a deed in a woman's name and builds a house in public and stands at the counter angle when required is making a certain kind of statement, and that statement was heard. Decker stopped being loud in the general store. The boys who'd mimicked her in the alley were 15 and 16 now, and they'd grown enough to understand what they'd done, and 2 of them went out of their way to hold a door. Fayette, when she saw Lena on the street one September morning, looked at her the way people sometimes look at each other when they realize they could have been better. A look that's part acknowledgement and part apology and part nothing, just a reckoning. Lena saw it, she nodded once and kept walking. That's the thing about her that I never stopped being glad of. She didn't need the town's good opinion. She was glad of it, same as anyone would be, but she didn't need it the way a person needs water. She'd been living without it long enough that she'd built something else, some internal accounting system that ran independent of what the street thought of her. What the street thought of her now was a correction to an error. She received it as such, evenly, without drama. October again. 1 year since the livery gate, the flour sack, the girl who didn't exist in the middle of the street. We were in the new house. Not finished, there were still boards to lay in the second room and shutters I hadn't gotten to, but finished enough, warm enough hours. She'd hung a shelf. I don't know where she found the brackets. She'd put the tin cup on it, the one from her box that I'd never asked about, and 2 other things I didn't know the provenance of, a small round stone and a dried flower, brown now, that might once have been yellow. I looked at the shelf. I looked at the tin cup. "Your mother's," I said. She was at the table. She looked up. "Her cup," she said. "She died when I was 4. I don't remember much. I remember the cup." "It belongs there," I said. She looked at the shelf for a moment, then at me. "So do I," she said. "I have told this story before, to Orrin, and once to Cutter before he died, and one other time to my sister's son when he was full of young man's certainty about what a life ought to look like, and I thought he could use a different example. I tell it the same way every time because it only happened one way, and that way is the way I told you. She is asleep in the other room as I'm telling you this. She leaves the door open, has since the first night in the house, no bolt required. The horses have settled for the night. The November air is coming under the door sill, and I'll need to get weather stripping on that before the month's out, which I'll do tomorrow or the day after. The cup is on the shelf. When I was 40 and 50, I thought the accounting of a life was what you accumulated: land, cattle, cash, standing. I was wrong about that, which is a common mistake among men who have been working alone too long. The accounting is simpler and harder than that. It's whether there was someone whose whole weight was in that word when they said, "Yes, I choose it." There is. That's the whole of it.